freedom to have our human rights. Good evening. Welcome to Toward Equality of Life. Thanks for being with us this evening here at BNN TV. Tonight, as I speak with you, literally not using any hyperbole or exaggerating, my heart is heavy, and my heart became noticeably heavy as of approximately 4 p.m. yesterday when I saw boxes of papers delivered to the Capitol intended to show sordid details about a human being who is the President of the United States. The title of my talk with you this evening is 1984, as I hope to unveil all the many improprieties and illegalities and problem steps and behaviors that have been taken from many months ago and even several years ago against a human being in this United States of America in modern times, in a day which prides itself on being the future and enlightened and democratic. I'd like to also say, without any qualification, that I am not a particular partisan of Mr. Bill Clinton. There are some things about Mr. Clinton that, in fact, I'm not too happy about. But those things in no way include anything about sex behavior or trying to cover up having had sex behavior. I do not care about that whatsoever, and I do not want to hear about it or have it brought to my attention. Also, in answering some statements that people have made to me about the President being a role model, I would like to say that the President, to me, is not a role model. He is neither here nor there as role models go, and I do believe it's the so-called American public that has been said in recent years to vilify politicians and to think of all of them with great cynicism and to hold them in great contempt in the roles that they play, second only or on par with the much maligned legal profession. I am outraged, certainly. Many in this country are outraged, and many in the world are outraged. But what form does our outrage take? And I'm responding to the word used by Bill Bennett when I use the word outrage in a book he has, which I haven't read, called something to the effect of the death of outrage. And I'd like to start by saying that outrage is by no means dead. It has decidedly taken a different form. It has taken forms of terrorism. It has taken forms of great dissatisfaction right amongst the citizens of our country. It has taken new forms that have to do with social justice and equity, and the same standards and systems for people with means as not with means, the same kinds of opportunities and the same kinds of treatments across the board. This is our new kind of outrage. And it being so blindsided and so small and so dark-aged as we proceed with our mob mentality today, we don't even understand the outrage that is against this country, for example. We don't even understand the outrage that lies within our borders and outside our borders. We don't have a clue that people are so angry and why they are angry. But let us leave this for another conversation. Let us start reviewing some of the events that led up to the condition that we find ourselves in today. to analyze what is far more important than any kind of misdeed, were it in fact a serious misdeed, which, as I said, I do not qualify this misdeed as being even a misdeed. But should there have been a misdeed, there are certain rights and procedures and systems that we must abide by in being a democratic and so-called enlightened country, steps and protections and methods that have to be taken in order to proceed with investigations and to proceed against people. And let's look at how these far more important kind of rights and systems we have in place are. How these far more important rights have been trampled on and thrown into the trash can and should be cause for alarm to anyone who is truly thinking for him or herself. Let us start out with one person named Linda Tripp, who is a holdover from the previous administration, which of course was not Democrat. Let us look that she was making somewhere in the $80,000 level salary, doing something in the field of covert intelligence at the Pentagon by the time she became known to us. Let us note that she was first, or one of the first, to be in the area when Vince Foster, the friend of particularly Hillary and also generally the administration, who worked for the administration, was found dead and later said to have committed suicide without a doubt. She was also a witness to Filegate, and perhaps, though I can't think of all these things because I don't write histories of them as they occur, other so-called scandals in the White House. In other words, somehow she is around when the so-called scandals occur, and right there, right on the scene, and in covert intelligence, and making a nice salary, and a holdover from another administration. She also has communications with the person who is the independent counsel who is investigating the president on matters in general. She also is a friend of a low-level, so to speak, originally unpaid, then paid intern named Monica Lewinsky, which is somewhat of a curious combination, perhaps, because people who are new to the White House and so on may not be quite palsy-walsy with people who are quite entrenched in their roles in the administrations for which they work, and who are, in some sense, at higher ranks and higher levels. The person named Monica Lewinsky, who is the intern, goes to the area where the president is far more, perhaps completely more, than anyone of her rank would generally be doing. And though her visits are numbered at 37, the sex alleged to have been had, as far as we know at the time I talked to you, and at the time I talked to you, as far as I know, the exact information from those papers delivered, I won't call it a report, has not been leaked, that is to say publicized, that is to say spilled out to the public, of course, at this time has not been given to the accused the way we did things in the Middle Ages. We just pulled the person into wherever the trauma was to occur for that person, gave no rights, gave no reasons, gave no rhymes. So here we have all that information sitting, and it may go to the president, but by then it will have certainly violated the right of the accused to see what the evidence is against him or herself. And I know persons might respond, well, this is not a legal trial, and yet the second side of the coin of this whole operation is to serve indictments. And as many of the so-called experts say, this is all new territory, and we do have precedents, and we do have ways that we are supposed to behave in the United States of America, ways that are far more important than if a person of male origin is exercising his gonads, as do the males of this land and all lands, and females for that matter, for a topic of our great concern and attention. Now, said Monica Lewinsky tells of sex to many people. I saw a person who had been at a spa as a stranger, who met up with her on a walk and was told, supposedly, about the sex she was having with the president. She also, of course, tells supposedly Linda Tripp. And again I say, Linda Tripp has conferred with said Kenneth Starr, the independent counsel, I cannot call him that. Kenneth Starr, the investigator. Kenneth Starr, who starts out with Whitewater, who goes through so many other supposed wrongdoings, and who now is going to nab somebody for his sexual activity. Kenneth Starr, along with all his male colleagues and comrades, who would nail another male on the basis of sex. There's another person in this saga, there are so many, a certain Mr. McDougal, who was a banker back in Little Rock, Arkansas, who was convicted, I believe, of taking a fraudulent loan and diverting funds, and with whom the Clintons made investments in a land development. While he is being put through the investigation of himself, Mr. McDougal never impugns any wrongdoing to Mr. or Mrs. Clinton. He is then convicted, put in jail, and undergoes very harsh circumstances while in jail, until finally, after a while, he starts to break and starts to say things which supposedly will impugn Mr. and Mrs. Clinton. He becomes what his ex-wife describes as a broken person, and he also, along the way, has suffered, maybe not just in conjunction with this, several strokes to his brain. His wife is also convicted of being part of this situation, and I don't know if she serves time for it, but she does go to jail for almost 2 years, I believe, for refusing, in her words, to say the things that Kenneth Starr wants her to say, that is, to say things that will impugn the president and accuse him of wrongdoing. When she is in jail for this period, I believe, of almost 2 years, she is put under rather harsh circumstances in places for criminals of much more serious crimes, if we could even call her refusal to speak a crime, and she's not allowed any reading material except the Bible. And she now faces another trial in the state of California, which I believe is underway, for similar kinds of charges. She's finally let out when her medical condition is deemed to be so severe and unattended enough with jail facilities. She's let out. Remember her in handcuffs and leg chains for refusing to testify. We are talking about the Middle Ages. We're also talking about Webb Hubbell, a cohort of Hillary Clinton back in Arkansas at a law firm, who is convicted of overbilling in a legal practice, and I would dare say that overbilling in legal practices is a rampant kind of phenomenon. I don't know the details of this case. Back to the Vince Foster suicide earlier on, which is investigated by Kenneth Starr. It's investigated because it's thought maybe it's murder, and the Clintons are put through very much, as are people around them, in trying to assess whether this is murder or perhaps pin murder on the situation. Finally, apparently, a report, so to speak, is made that comes up with nothing. At the same time, a Mr. Jerry Falwell, a Christian minister, is selling from his church a tape which talks about the idea that the Clintons murdered or may have murdered Vince Foster, and I believe also, I've never seen the tape, something about the Clintons being runners of drugs. He has since retracted that tape and doesn't like to have it brought up, and says, thinks nothing of it, that at one time, because that was the past, and now he's not doing it. This is a person who says God made him president, that is to say Bill Clinton, and so now, for God's sake, he should resign. He should be contrite. He should hang his head in shame. Then we have a Lucy Goldberg, a book publisher, who is either contacted or somehow in communication with Linda Tripp, and this is well in advance of the tapes being given to the public, or information about them being spilled to the public. And apparently a book deal was something that was being talked about. And apparently, so the story goes, Lucy Goldberg is one of the people to advise Linda Tripp to tape these conversations with Monica Lewinsky. Now, Lucy Goldberg on a talk show the day Bill Clinton admitted, so to speak, that he had sex with Monica Lewinsky, was asked, did it interest her to hear the president give his so-called apology, and would anything interest her of the president? And she said, absolutely not, except, and I quote, if he set himself on fire. Now, Linda Tripp says about her taping, which was illegal in Maryland, and she worked in covert intelligence at the Pentagon, and she is around the government in Washington, D.C., in government operations for many years. She said she knew nothing of this as a defense in, I believe, a case that is brought against her now in the state of Maryland, and we know that the Radio Shack person who sold it to her since has said he's obliged to tell all people who buy devices for listening on phones that they are illegal in the state of Maryland. The tapes go to Lucy Goldberg, curiously enough, and the tapes go to Kenneth Starr. And of course, part of the tapes, just enough to do damage, just enough to be smearing, go to the public, we the public. And if you hearken back to the parts of the tapes that we did get gist of, there seemed to be phenomenal questions of leading statements goading Monica Lewinsky into saying things on those tapes that would set up a very hefty case against the president. And we also remember Monica's supposed statement on the tape, which is that I have lied all my life. We also have the dress with the semen stains on it from Monica Lewinsky, and she seems like a fairly hygienic girl from all appearances to me. One has to question, why does one keep a dress with semen stain on it, given the way that person seems to comport herself? Is this an intentional idea, and can somebody be goaded into doing something like this? Then we have Paula Jones, hearkening back from Little Rock, Arkansas. And Paula Jones's attorneys confer also with the attorneys who are investigating the president way back when, which is a very nice, curious phenomenon. And Paula Jones herself is supported by the money of one Rutherford Institute, spokesperson Susan McMillan, and generally with funds for some of these things coming from a certain very wealthy person whose name I don't have with me tonight.
Dr. Mroczek is likely referring to billionaire Melon Scaife.
He's the one who's been bandied about so often. I believe he may be the person who owns the American Spectator magazine, which has had people working literally over time that Bill Clinton has been president to dig up dirt on the Clintons. And that is how Paula Jones first was pulled out of Little Rock into notoriety, into making a case against the president. We are surely in a war. We are surely bashing each other. We are surely in the midst of adversity between opposing sides. And the bashing is rather one side being offensive and the other side on the defense, the other side reacting. And I might say that it's been said that Kenneth Starr has been bashed by the administration, etc., and the party under investigation, or the party in which the president belongs, But nothing really has been said about him except his ways. He's not been smeared with any kind of particular propaganda. I do believe people looking at some of the ways he has proceeded have come to some conclusions of their own that a lot of rights have been violated. These are important rights. Rights like being read one's Miranda rights when one is busted, which is not relevant here, but it's a kind of right I'm talking about that is being trampled upon. Rights where one can't walk into one's facility without a warrant to be there. Rights that one cannot use illegally obtained evidence. Rights that one cannot entrap, egg someone on. The dress, the phone calls, the communications with people to set these things up potentially before they ever even occur. The rights to not be held to talk without a lawyer, as was Monica Lewinsky, as we go. I will tell you more of these rights. The rights to be told to not tell the content of secret investigations when one uses a grand jury. The rights to not libel, as when Hillary has been called a lesbian, or when Senator John McCain made the joke, quote unquote, why is the first daughter so unattractive, and he probably did not use those words, because she is the daughter of Hillary and Janet Reno. We'll talk more about these kinds of rights that I'm trying to get at that are way more important than any sex in a bedroom, which is not important, period. Now let's look at what the adversity of these two opposing parties is about when you look at it closely. You have one side talking more and more about environment, and especially with the successor to the current president that is being shaped for the Democratic Party, environment. You hear about investment in schools. You hear about internet in the classrooms. You hear a heavy hand on patient rights. You hear the inclusion of all varieties of sexual orientation, because no matter your views on these subjects, people are here, they are who they are. What's the point of not including everybody? You hear of ethnicities. You hear of Social Security and the surplus, and using the surplus that we are supposed to have, which is a technicality really, but the surplus that we have in theory, using that to protect Social Security. On the other side, you hear of tax cuts. You hear of more money for defense companies. You hear of other kinds of plans for Social Security that would involve private investments. You hear of vouchers for schools, and by the time you get what a voucher will pay you for school, unfortunately, the school will cost way more than the voucher can ever cover. You get a refusal of sexual orientation, and you certainly get, in the last few months and weeks and days and hours, a great resistance to the potential Al Gore being president. I listen to very much of what people do and say regarding these issues, and there is great resistance and determination that someone who would want you to not drive, to paraphrase something I heard just today or yesterday, someone who would not want you to drive a bigger vehicle, recreation vehicle, but to economize and not spill carbon monoxides into the atmosphere unnecessarily, should not be president. Then there were the jobs for Kenneth Starr by this same very wealthy individual behind some of these oppositions and attempts to get dirt and helping with cases against the president. This same wealthy person, I wish I had the name with me today, I do not, had a job ready for Kenneth Starr a while ago at Pepperdine University. And it was only when people complained that he finish his work that he declined that job, which he was going to take. Then we have Kenneth Starr coming from a law firm in Washington, D.C., which is a primary provider and servicer and interrelated partner with the tobacco industry. And we know who is the biggest foe of the tobacco industry. Again, something I don't agree with, which is neither here nor there, but it happens to be one Bill Clinton. And you have one investigator against Bill Clinton coming from a law firm that serves that constituent. Just today, by the way, LA has banned potentially any billboard advertising of cigarettes pretty much all around LA to show you how serious it is for the tobacco companies. Then there are the legal fees on each side. There is one side collects now what's said to be up to $50 million on the current investigation and hundreds of millions throughout this whole saga. And the other side, which is bankrupt and impoverished, which is a very effective way to fight a war. Now, listen to this curiosity in 1984. The time that the Monica Lewinsky story so-called breaks, let's look at a lot of coincidental things that fall into place together. We have Mr. Kenneth Starr and a certain Mr. Isikoff of Newsweek magazine in communication with each other prior to the break. We have Newsweek holding off telling the story because Kenneth Starr is not quite at the point he needs to be. Then we have Newsweek breaking the story. Who lets it be known? Who breaks it? Who leaks this kind of information? That is supposed to be illegal, one of the many rights that we're talking about here, far more precious than even grave transgressions. Then we have a certain Kathleen Willey, who is said also to have tried to negotiate a book deal, tell her story close in time. Then we also have movies like Primary Color and Wag the Dog, close in time. Primary Colors being a spoof, I haven't seen it, I believe, or parody of Bill Clinton to an effect. Then we have, wouldn't you believe it, documentaries about Ronald Reagan appearing on TV. And now we have a tour and talk about the White House from Nancy Reagan coming up shortly. And when the boxes were delivered to the Capitol yesterday, the opposition party leaders came out for an impromptu press conference which was carried on full on the major TVs, major cable stations, telling of all their plans regarding tax cuts, etc., that I referred to before, as on the heels of boxes being delivered of evidence the person accused could not see about himself. How it's said, what is said that may be right, what is said that may be wrong, how it's put together. No, it won't do to just laugh and say he knows what's in there that's good enough for him. We are not a mob. This is not the Middle Ages. The transgression is not. Is Monica Lewinsky goaded to a frenzy and a panic when she talks on the tape? Is she goaded into losing it, so to speak, and being distraught and making mistakes and getting into talking points? I heard some experts say that those talking points seem most likely to come from both Monica and Linda Tripp, that there are different people involved in them, and I can't recall the analysis, but that was the analysis by some presumably outside observers who do this kind of thing as part of their profession. Monica Lewinsky is held at a hotel for 6 hours way back when this story has broken or begins to break. She thinks she's going to meet Linda Tripp, but lo and behold, she's meeting with Kenneth Starr or Kenneth Starr's people. They are the ones who meet her there. And she's held without a lawyer. And the lawyers know you don't hold potential witnesses, people you are trying to exact information from, without a lawyer. She's told her mother will be brought in. supposedly. And I must say, at this time, information that Linda Tripp was once accused of shoplifting is brought out, surely by counterparties. Now, Kenneth Starr shares information with Paula Jones's attorney. The investigator shares information with attorneys of a totally unrelated, independent, separate, non-government sponsored case. The Monica Lewinsky matter is eventually called immaterial, meaning it is not relevant to the Paula Jones case. And the lawyers from Ken Starr's office usurped the case of Paula Jones using documents she has to build her case. And her case is said to be not possible to proceed. Let us remember what's going on at this time, around January and so on. The president is riding high. The polls are high then as they are now. He has to give his State of the Union, which he does in spite of this difficulty. But he is doing things, generally speaking, as favorabilities go, that put him in high standing regarding job performance, and he has many plans, by the way he speaks in his State of the Union, for things that he hopes yet to accomplish, particularly spurred to action because people were starting to accuse him of being a lame duck and not being energized enough to go further and go all the way with his original programs. Then comes the sex and the details of sex, and the people who are astonished that grown males and females have sex. With all the television, all the soap operas, all the top box office movies, all the real lives they live in three-quarter time, people are astonished that sex happens. And sex happens outside of marriage, grown people having sex. Certainly the country is quite hung up on sex, as it has been for ages. And it loves to peep through the peephole and see others do what it fantasizes to do or does itself. And Hillary goes on television and says that people of the so-called right wing have been trying to inflict downfall on this president and even any other situation any other office he held for a long time, that he had this effect on people and that this kind of thing was occurring. But to the country, I would say about the sex that all of you who have had sex outside of commitments and outside of relationships, and all the fathers who have gone to the schoolyard to pick up the children, or who have them on the weekend, or who come home to their wives and children, and yet who have had sex outside of their marriage or just sex. And if you lied about it to your wife, if you lied about it to anyone that you didn't want to know about it, please leave your office, please leave your job without further ado. Take no further delay. Just move straight ahead and leave your job. And don't go near your children, because some people are saying the president should not appear in schools or around their teenagers because he's not a good role model. Do not go near your children if you have had sex outside your marriage. If you have lied about it to your wife, if you have lied about it to your parents, if you have lied about it to anyone. And all people on second and third marriages, all people in step families, all people in single-parent homes, all people who never even got to be with the people they had sex with, who only had the sex and had no relationship whatsoever, for all the people who even birthed children and had no relationship, and for all who watch TV and all who let the children watch and all who take the children to movies, and for all the people who let soap operas into their homes. And the movies that you can only see, you can no longer see a nice family-oriented, comedic, simple, non-violent, non-sexual movie these days. You can see people in sex, killing, teasing, terrifying, being vicious, being nasty, doing things the mind can't even conceive until it's done on television, blowing each other away to make their day. To all of you people, please leave your office and don't be a danger to the children you are around. Now, Howard Stern is on CBS, I hear, and I have no objection. I don't believe in censorship, so when I criticize television for what it puts out there, I don't put it out in a moralizing way. I put it out because it's not first-class kind of thing. Not to be clean about it, but it's purposely put to be devious and sadistic, etc., on purpose. And that's not art, that's not entertainment. But I'm not into censorship. If that's what people want to do, I wouldn't agree with censorship. But Howard Stern is on CBS now, and Howard Stern, when he was on cable, and I hear he's continuing some of this, has women naked on TV, breast covered, of course. That's all the more lugubrious for people to watch. And he decides, what kind of asses do they have, and who's going to get the money for a breast enlargement? Who's going to win of all the naked girls? And to sit on his lap and things that I cannot repeat here, CBS. I happened to flick by ER the other day, and one of the people, maybe George Clooney, I don't watch that show, without joking, said just in a regular script line, I wonder if she's getting any. This was standard ER conversation. Television, who's bringing me and bringing so many people the news, the conflict, the desire to have sides going at each other for great entertainment TV, cannot be the medium for the message, cannot be the medium to tell what moralism, and I don't call this morality because we mentioned social justice in the beginning, which is a form of true morality, cannot be the medium for the moralism about who's having sex with whom and who tried to lie about it. And is there an agenda? How do you move a whole nation of people in a so-called democracy? How do you have a coup, break the back of a liberal agenda, a populist soul, a common cause, a protected environment, pay equity? How do you continue more invidious cutting down of trees and poisoning the water? Does that match with being a single parent? Does that match with being having infidelity? Does that match with being in a step family? Does that match with lying about sex? Does that match with personal conditions of life? People hauled in to testify regarding this investigation, closest guards and confidants stripped away from the human being, not the president, the human being, as any human being who gets into the grips of media controversy. And it's happened to more people than the president. People stripped away so there'd be no one he could lean on, no one he could talk to, and all paranoia prevail as every confidence is stripped away. And it's also said that at times, way back when Ken Starr was asking people to come in, they were questioned as to what they had said against Kenneth Starr as a so-called legitimate question of grand jury investigation. Now, when we're talking about sex, are we talking crime or are we talking sin? And if we're talking sin, are we talking religion or are we talking government, democracy in the United States of America? I did not vote for a priest. I voted for a president. And I will vote for a president in the future, not a priest. And as I said to you, I am not in complete agreement with Bill Clinton. I am not fanatically enamored of him. I'm talking about a human being who is being drugged through the Inquisition of the Middle Ages. And by the way, when people say that Mr. Clinton did not tell the truth, we won't even bother to go into how many of us would cover having had oral sex in a similar situation and what pathways that would have led down had he announced that. But the time he first said, even a president has a private life, and that Ken Starr should get off it, and that it's a private matter between his family and himself, there was a great amount of truth in that. It seemed to be the way he truly feels. Don't say he doesn't tell the truth. He probably told a lot of truth when he said, get off of my personal business and I resent being taken down this pathway. And now he goes around apologizing as the party tells him he must do, and being a good party person, which in politics one must be, you do what parties agree that you should do in many circumstances. Regarding the marijuana that people always hark back to, that he said he didn't inhale, there was also a time he talked to teenagers or students on VH1, and they asked him about marijuana. Did he smoke it, or would he smoke it? Would he smoke it if he had the chance in their circumstances? And he honestly said to them casually, speaking from his heart, I probably would have. So let's not just say that Bill Clinton is one great big liar. And as far as his not having served in Vietnam, a great many of us come from that time, where we see in retrospect now from Secretary McNamara himself, it was a very dubious time indeed, and he stands with a great in the midst of a great number of people who questioned, as did he, the Vietnam War. Have we gone too far demonizing people, pathologizing them, telling who should have counseling, how the marriages should be lived, what women should do? And again, it's been said already so many times, let he who is without sin cast the first stone. A person was called into the grand jury in the beginnings of all this nonsense when he merely made calls to ask an investigation of Ken Starr for having been involved in the Maryland taping. Oh, once he made that inquiry, he was hauled into the grand jury. Then remember the time the bookstore was subpoenaed to provide a list of the books that Monica Lewinsky bought. Now, what bearing do books about sex, if that was it, have to do with her having sex with the president? Even if information about sex was found from those books, why does one have to find the books? How is that pertinent grand jury material? And he prevailed. He got that list, even though the bookstore fought it for a while. How is it people were ever allowed to drag Bill Clinton in to the Paula Jones trial, so to speak, or investigation, deposition? How is it questions about Monica Lewinsky ever came into that to begin with? How is it that was allowed into something that had to do with sexual harassment? Why was he having to answer a question of whether he had sex with Monica Lewinsky, which threw him for a loop, apparently? Since when can the state pursue whether somebody had sex? And I say to women, regarding all this sexual harassment, yes, there is sexual harassment, but when are women going to stand up and not involve themselves and take whatever comes their way, fight the struggle to get to the places they want to go without having sex? And when they do have sex and the sex turns sour, when are they going to learn that this is the male world that they're living in, and you're not going to change males by calling them on the legal carpet for it? That is not the way things will happen. When are women going to take responsibilities to get where they're going for themselves and not point to male supremacy? All right, let's look at the list of rights that are being violated. Back to that list that I brought in but held off till now to talk to you about. As I said, we're talking about rights here that are violated similar to Miranda rights of being read, your right to have a lawyer present before you speak and so on, which has been attempted to be taken away in recent history or mitigated. The right to not let somebody walk into your premise without a warrant. The right to not be able to use illegally obtained evidence, perhaps the tape from Maryland. The right to not entrap someone, perhaps the tape from Maryland, possibly the dress. Communicating with independent counsels and perhaps proceeding from there in advance of. The right to not be held without your lawyer present, as was one person in this episode at a hotel. The right that contents of a so-called secret grand jury investigation not be made public. The right that you can't libel someone, call them lesbian, because you feel like it. The right that you cannot tape without mutual awareness. The right that you can't harass people by frivolously asking them to appear in the grand jury, as may have been done some of the time. This is only castles burning. It's only some of the most important rights that an advanced country such as ours has come to that are being trampled on. That you can't use the law to bankrupt people. There are legal terms for these things that I am describing. You can't use the law to scare people. And you can't offer third-party allegations of a say-so, a triple hearsay in a brief to the court, as was done in the Paula Jones rebuttal to one of the president's briefs with the court. Things were brought in that someone said he did, and I don't even want to repeat it, and nobody came down, as far as I know, on the lawyers for putting trash into the brief. But all the info got out into the media. That you can't seek evidence or testimony without really good cause, like when you go for books on phone sex, that you want a list of books that someone has read. That you cannot have a conflict of interest when you're involved in a legal matter. Perhaps that you come from a law firm very entrenched in the provision of service and working with tobacco, going up against a person who is a severe opponent of tobacco. That you have a real reason to impeach. That is to say that something in the very government, such as illegal funds to fund illegal operations in other countries and sell armaments of this country to countries we're not, let alone not should be selling to secretly, but aren't even allowed to deal with. I won't get into things that have been done. You have to have reasons that you are subverting the government as we know it, the system of governing as we know it. Reasons to impeach. You have to have a reason. You have to, we would hope that accused has a right to see the evidence, so to speak, against himself. Not that it's blurbed out or stored somewhere for other people when the very accused doesn't get it immediately. And I've also heard Helen Thomas, the seasoned reporter, that elderly lady at the White House, whom you might see a lot, she was honored recently, talk about, and she's been very critical of Clinton too. She's not particularly partisan. I heard her say the other day that Kenneth Starr has severe animosity for quite some time against Bill Clinton, personal animosity. Yes. It's only castles burning. It's only about pay equity, health care, even when you do pay, not getting to see the doctors you need, dynamite schools that you will not be able to afford at $1,000 a child a year. voucher. Forest denuded privacy. Now, Bill Clinton has been involved, in my opinion, in eroding some of our privacies by some of the positions he's taken on tapping phones and so on. So I don't agree with him totally on things he does. I don't agree with his bombings and so on. Yet I talk about human rights. We have problems with the treatment of people equally who are in jail. The same kinds of sentences for the same kinds of crimes and the same kinds of means, financial means. Morality, for one, most deeply is social justice. Humane and decent treatment, respect towards each other, no matter who we are. Even if we are terrible killers, there's no reason to be indecent, immoral, and inhumane to each other. And forgiveness, what is there to forgive? Is it ours to forgive? There's not even an issue to forgive here. There are many of us who have come to the point, eventually as history moves on, this is where it will be. It is not good to grovel. It is not good to be humiliated. And how better can you humiliate a person than when you expose the intricacies of something he did during sex, which is why we so much have sex in private. Because you can really humiliate someone that way. What forgiveness? Far be it from me. What chutzpah if I would stand somewhere and say somebody owes me forgiveness for something of a sex matter that I'm not even party to. Or for trying to cover it up. To me, why should I be told about it? Why should I know it? Now, we know in times past when presidents had affairs, reporters let those affairs be, though they knew about them. Yes, the president has sex. He has gonads. And regarding the president's residence and his office not being private but being owned by all of us, while he inhabits it, those are his facilities. Not literally, but during the time he is there, that's his office to use. That's his residence to use. He has to sleep, he has to go to the bathroom, he has to eat, he has to breathe, he has to sigh, he has to flatulate. He has to go to the refrigerator and get a beer and a piece of cheese, and he has to stuff his face and let the juice drip down. He's a human being. Yeah, the president. The president. He's a human being, yeah. And you know what? If Bill Clinton goes on to have sex with whomever, and if the other people with him want to have sex and so on, what can I tell you? Please don't tell me about it. Please don't make it my business. Yes, some people have said to me, there are many out there who wish they could have circumstances like this, so it's a matter of jealousy. Or those out there who have suffered infidelity, who are projecting, or those who feel powerless in a technological world. And we're talking women, for those of you who hear me out there, women, hopefully, I don't go by genders anyway, but please, that's why do women like Bill Clinton? You might hear that. Now, I'm not saying I'm a woman who likes Bill Clinton at all. I'm not saying I like Bill Clinton. But the idea that they're not so harsh with the so-called things that he has done. Don't we know the males? Don't we know the males? And perhaps he had a partnership with Hillary where Hillary is just fine with this. Who knows? I don't want to think about that. That is not my business. Perhaps he did. And this would not be unusual. And yet they could be very committed, and they could have a political and life agenda together. And regarding people who talk about World War II a lot as being offended because they had family members in World War II and so on, and they're offended now. I'd like to say that I've had family members in World War II that did great damage to my family, the legacy of that as to any family. And yet I'm saying the things I'm saying. I'm no less patriotic. I'm no less thinking about these things. I'll go back to what I said in starting this in the beginning. There's plenty of outrage. And the outrage is not always about who's the role model, who's having sex, who's lying about sex. The outrage and the resentment from within the country and without the country, against the country, is very deep. And the outrage is about social justice. And also, once again, the media that brings me the information of how astonishing, startling, and conflictual and adverse this situation is, which perpetrates sex, nastiness, sarcasm, sadism, masochism, hurtfulness, twisted ways of being devious to each other, and very outlandish so-called improprieties around the clock cannot be the medium to give me any kind of message. But remember morality, remember the country, remember our rights that I spoke about that are way more important, how evidence is obtained. These are things people have suffered for, the rights you have to a lawyer, the rights you have to know what the accusations are against you, the rights you have to not be entrapped into a crime. These are so important, and that's what this so-called great country is about. That's where the advancements have been made. I will sing this song. My country, 'tis of the sweet land of liberty, of thee I sing. Land where my fathers died, land of the pilgrim's pride, from every mountain side. Let freedom ring. Freedom of expression, freedom of association. And freedom to have our human rights. Thank you for being with me this evening. See you soon.